The bullet tore through the saloon door just as Lily Mee stepped onto the dusty street, and she barely flinched because in Globe, Arizona Territory in 1884, a woman learned to distinguish between danger aimed at her and danger that was simply Tuesday afternoon. She clutched the burlap sack of flour against her chest, the precious cargo she'd bartered 3 jars of her infamous preserves for. Though the shopkeeper had made her promise never to bring him food again after last month's incident with the pickled eggs that had laid him up for 2 days straight. Lily knew her reputation in this copper mining town, knew what the miners whispered when she walked past the assay office, knew that even the most desperate prospector would rather gnaw on his own boot leather than accept an invitation to her supper table. But she kept her chin high, because pride was about all she had left besides the small ranch her father had died building and her mother had abandoned when she'd run off with a gambler from Tucson. The ranch sat 3 miles outside town, a collection of weathered buildings that housed more hope than livestock these days, and Lily walked that dusty road every week to trade what meager goods she could produce for the supplies she needed to survive. She was 22 years old, tall and lean with dark brown hair she kept pinned back practical-like, and eyes the color of honey that could have been pretty if they hadn't carried such bone-deep exhaustion. Her father had taught her to shoot, to track, to mend fences and break horses, but the one skill that had eluded her despite years of effort was the ability to create anything edible in a kitchen. It wasn't for lack of trying. Lord knew she'd followed her mother's old recipes to the letter, measured every ingredient with the precision of a Wells Fargo accountant. But somehow whatever she touched turned to something that could strip paint or cure leather depending on the consistency. The sun beat down merciless as she made her way back toward home, the July heat shimmering off the rocky terrain in waves that made the distant mountains look like they were breathing. She was halfway there when she spotted the horse, a massive bay gelding standing riderless near a cluster of mesquite trees, reins trailing in the dirt. Lily approached cautiously, scanning the scrubland for signs of trouble, and that's when she saw him, a man sprawled in the sparse shade, his hat covering his face and his body still as death. Her first instinct was to keep walking because a woman alone couldn't be too careful, but something about the way his chest rose and fell shallow and uneven made her feet carry her closer despite her better judgment. "Mister," she called out, keeping a respectful distance. "You hurt?" The hat shifted slightly, but he didn't respond. Lily noticed the dark stain spreading across his shoulder then, the way his shirt stuck to his skin with blood that looked mostly dry in the heat. She knelt beside him and lifted the hat from his face, finding herself looking at a man maybe 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin, dark stubble along a strong jaw, and features that would have been handsome if they hadn't been drawn tight with pain. His eyes fluttered open, startling blue against his tanned face, and tried to focus on her. "Water," he managed, his voice rough as gravel. Lily uncorked her canteen and helped him drink, supporting his head while he swallowed greedily. "You've been shot," she said, stating the obvious. "How long have you been out here?" "Since last night," he said, his words coming easier with the water. "Ambushed by claim jumpers up near the Silver King mine. Got away but not clean." He tried to sit up and winced, his face going pale beneath the tan. "Horse kept going, must have stopped here." "You need a doctor," Lily said, already calculating the distance back to town, the time it would take, the blood he'd already lost. "Can't," he said, and something desperate flashed across his face. "They'll be watching town, waiting to see if I show up dead or alive. Those men, they work for someone big, someone who wants my claim." He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength for someone in his condition. "Please, I just need somewhere to lay low for a few days, somewhere they wouldn't think to look." Every practical bone in Lily's body screamed at her to leave him, to run to town and get the marshal, to let this be someone else's problem. But those blue eyes held hers with such raw need that she found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. "I've got a place, small ranch west of here. Nothing fancy and I'm alone there, but it's off the main roads." "I'm Reid Zimmerman," he said as she helped him stand, his arm heavy across her shoulders. "And I'm in your debt." "Lily me," she replied, guiding him toward his horse. "Though you might want to hold off on the gratitude until you see what I've got to offer. I should warn you, I can tend your wound well enough. Learned that from patching up livestock. But if you're expecting decent meals, you'd be better off taking your chances with those claim jumpers." Reid managed something between a laugh and a groan as she helped him into the saddle. "Can't be that bad. 3 men have claimed my cooking should be classified as an act of violence," Lily said dryly, leading the horse back toward the road with her flour sack in one hand and the reins in the other. "And old Pete Harmon swears my stew gave him visions of the afterlife, though the doctor said that might have been the fever." The ride to her ranch took longer than usual, with Reid swaying in the saddle and Lily walking alongside to make sure he didn't fall. By the time they reached the small cluster of buildings, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold that matched the ore that had brought so many fortune seekers to this corner of Arizona. She helped Reid down and into the small house, settling him on her father's old bed in the back room, the only real bedroom in the place, since she'd been sleeping on a cot in the main room anyway. "Let me see that shoulder," she said, gathering clean water and the medical supplies she kept for the animals. Reid struggled out of his shirt, revealing a lean, muscled torso marked with scars that spoke of a hard life, and a bullet wound that had torn through the meat of his shoulder but thankfully missed anything vital. Lily cleaned it with steady hands, ignoring his sharp intakes of breath, and packed it with carbolic salve before binding it tight. "Bullet went clean through. You're lucky." "Don't feel lucky," Reid said through gritted teeth, but when she finished and met his eyes, something like respect flickered there. "You've done this before. Lost a cow to barbed wire last month, had to stitch her up. You're not much different, just more complaints." Lily pulled a blanket over him and stood. "Rest now. I'll bring you something to eat soon." "Looking forward to it," Reid said, already drifting toward sleep, and Lily couldn't tell if he'd forgotten her warning or was too exhausted to care. In the kitchen, if the cramped space with its battered stove and rickety shelves could be called that, Lily stared at her meager supplies and felt the familiar frustration rise up. She could birth a calf, could gentle a wild horse, could shoot a rattler at 20 paces, but this, the simple act of creating sustenance, remained her greatest failure. Still, Reid needed food to regain his strength, so she set about making a simple soup, carefully chopping vegetables, adding salt and herbs the way she'd seen her mother do 100 times, letting it simmer while she tended to the evening chores. By the time she brought a bowl to Reid's bedside, night had fallen complete, and the desert had begun its nightly chorus of crickets and distant coyotes. He was awake again, propped against the pillows she'd arranged, and he took the bowl with both hands like a man who understood hunger. Lily perched on the edge of the wooden chair nearby, watching with trepidation as he raised the spoon to his lips. Reid swallowed, and Lily watched his face carefully for the telltale signs of distress, the way his jaw would clench or his eyes would water. Instead, he took another spoonful, then another, working through the bowl with steady determination while she sat in confused silence. When he'd scraped the bottom clean, he looked up at her with those startling blue eyes and said the words she'd never expected to hear in her lifetime. "That was good. Any chance there's more? Lily stared at him. You want seconds, if you're offering, Reed said, holding out the bowl. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning, and that's the best thing I've tasted in weeks. She took the bowl back to the kitchen in a daze, ladling out another generous portion while her mind spun. Either Reed Zimmerman had damaged his taste buds in addition to his shoulder, or he was being polite to a painful degree, or something impossible was happening. She brought him the second bowl and watched in amazement as he consumed it with the same enthusiasm as the first, even making an appreciative sound that surely couldn't be genuine. You don't have to pretend, Lily said finally. I know my cooking is terrible. The whole town knows it. You won't hurt my feelings by admitting it. Reed set down the empty bowl and looked at her with complete sincerity. I'm not pretending. That was a fine meal, Lily me. Your vegetables were cooked just right, not too soft, and the broth had good flavor. Maybe you're being too hard on yourself. Last month I made biscuits that Jimmy Crawford tried to use as ammunition in his slingshot, Lily said flatly. They worked. Well, I'm no judge of biscuits, but I know good soup when I taste it. Reed settled back against the pillows, his face already looking less drawn than when she'd found him. Thank you for all of this. Taking in a stranger, tending his wounds, feeding him. You didn't have to do any of it. My father always said we help who we can when we can, Lily replied, collecting the bowl. Rest now. We'll figure out what to do about those men in the morning. She left him to sleep and returned to her cot in the main room, but sleep eluded her for hours as she replayed the evening in her mind. Reed's enjoyment of her cooking had seemed so genuine, so utterly at odds with every other experience she'd had, that it occupied her thoughts more than the danger of harboring a wounded man or the complications his presence could bring. Finally, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into dreams filled with confusion and something that might have been hope. Morning came with the persistent crow of her rooster, and the realization that she had a guest who would need breakfast. Lily checked on Reed first, finding him awake and looking marginally better despite the fever she could see starting to flush his cheeks. She changed his bandages, pleased that the wound showed no signs of serious infection yet, and promised to bring him food soon. In the kitchen, she attempted scrambled eggs and bacon, simple fare that even she should be able to manage, though past experience suggested otherwise. The eggs came out slightly rubbery and the bacon was unevenly cooked. Some parts nearly burnt while others seemed hardly touched by heat. But when she brought the plate to Reed, he accepted it gratefully and ate every bite without a single grimace. Lily sat in her chair and watched him with open suspicion. You've got no sense of taste, do you? She asked bluntly. Some kind of condition that makes everything bland. Reed laughed, then winced and pressed his hand to his wounded shoulder. I can taste just fine. This is good, Lily. Not fancy, but food doesn't have to be fancy to be satisfying. He studied her face, clearly seeing the disbelief written there. Tell me about these other people who didn't like your cooking. What exactly happened? So Lily told him, starting with her mother's departure when Lily was 15, how she tried desperately to fill that role and failed spectacularly. How her father had eaten her meals without complaint, but she'd later found his stash of jerky and hardtack hidden in the barn. She told him about the church social, where her apple pie had caused old Mrs. Henderson to declare she'd lost her will to live. About the ranch hand who'd quit after 1 week, citing her cooking as grounds for hazardous work conditions. About the endless string of failures that had become her shameful legacy in Globe. Reed listened to it all, his expression thoughtful, and when she finished, he said something that surprised her. Did any of those people actually get sick? Like really sick, not just complaining? Lily paused, thinking back through the incidents. Well, no. Pete Harmon had a fever, but the doctor said that was from an infected tooth. Nothing to do with my stew. And Mrs. Henderson lived another 3 years after the pie incident, spry as anything. But they all said it was terrible. Maybe, Reed said carefully, it's not as bad as they made it out to be. Maybe they were just used to someone else's cooking and anything different seemed wrong. Or maybe some of them were just plain mean about it because that's what people do sometimes. You're saying an entire town is lying to me about my cooking? Lily couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. I'm saying you took care of a dying stranger, brought me to your home, tended my wounds, and fed me 2 meals that gave me strength when I needed it most. Reed's blue eyes held her steady. That's the truth, I know. The rest is just talk. Something shifted in Lily's chest, a small crack in the wall she'd built around that particular inadequacy. She wanted to believe him, wanted it more than she cared to admit, but years of evidence suggested otherwise. Still, Reed was looking at her with such earnest conviction that she found herself nodding slowly. I need to check the water pump and tend the animals, she said, standing abruptly. I'll bring you lunch in a few hours. Try to rest and let that fever break. Outside, in the honest heat of the Arizona morning, Lily went through her chores with distracted efficiency. She had 2 cows, a handful of chickens, and a goat that provided enough for her basic needs but nothing extra to sell or trade. The ranch itself was small, maybe 40 acres of scrubland that her father had claimed with dreams of building something bigger, dreams that had died with him 2 years ago when his heart had given out during a routine day of fence mending. She should have sold it, moved somewhere else, started over, but the thought of abandoning the last piece of her father felt like betrayal. When she returned to the house, Reed was sitting up in bed looking pale but determined. I need to ask you something, he said as she entered. Those men who shot me, they're going to realize eventually that I didn't die out in the desert. When that happens, they might start searching. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Too late for that, Lily said practically. You're already here and I'm already involved. Question is, what are we going to do about it? Reed raised an eyebrow. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when I decided to help you. Besides, I'm not exactly helpless. She patted the rifle she'd brought in from outside. My father made sure I could defend this place if needed. Reed studied her for a long moment, something like admiration crossing his features. The claim thereafter, it's a good one. I found a vein of silver that could set me up for life if I can hold on to it long enough to register it properly. But the man who wants it, his name is Victor Sutton, and he owns half the mining operations in this territory. He's got money, influence, and men willing to do his dirty work. Then we make sure you stay alive long enough to register that claim, Lily said firmly. How long before you're well enough to travel to the territorial office? A week, maybe less if the fever doesn't get worse. Reed leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion clear on his face. You're either very brave or very foolish, Lily me. Probably both, she admitted. Now rest. I'll keep watch. The next several days fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural despite the strangeness of having a man in her house. Lily tended Reed's wound twice daily, pleased to see it healing clean despite his persistent low fever. She brought him meals 3 times a day, simple food that he consumed with consistent enthusiasm that continued to baffle her. He always asked for seconds, sometimes thirds, and each time she watched him eat with genuine pleasure, the old certainty about her terrible cooking cracked a little more. Between caring for Reed and maintaining the ranch, Lily found herself talking to him more than she'd talked to anyone in years. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his own parents to cholera and drifting west looking for opportunity. He spoke of the loneliness of prospecting, The long days in the mountains with nothing but hope and a pickaxe. The moment he'd struck silver and known his life was about to change. She told him about her father's dreams for the ranch, about her mother's weakness for charming men with empty promises, about the isolation of being known as the woman who couldn't cook in a territory where women were judged by such things. "It's not fair," Reed said on the fourth day, when he was finally strong enough to sit in a chair by the window. "Judging you by one skill when you've got so many others. You're smart, capable, brave. You've kept this ranch running alone, which is more than most men could do. Tell that to the women in town who look at me like I'm defective," Lily said, but without the usual bitterness. Something about Reed's presence, his unwavering appreciation for her cooking and his easy conversation, had soothed some of the raw edges she'd carried for so long. "Their loss," Reed said simply, and the way he looked at her made Lily's breath catch. That night, she made a stew using the last of her vegetables and some dried beef, putting more care into it than usual. And when Reed not only cleaned his bowl but declared it the best stew he'd ever eaten, Lily felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude or relief at being appreciated. It was something warmer, something that made her hyper-aware of his presence in her home, the sound of his voice, the way his eyes followed her movements. On the fifth day, Reed was strong enough to walk outside, and Lily showed him around the property with something like pride. He examined her repairs to the barn, the clever system she'd devised for collecting rainwater, the fence line she'd mended herself, and his respect was evident in every comment. When they reached the small corral where her 2 cows grazed, he turned to her with sudden intensity. "Come with me," he said. "When I register the claim, when I start working the mine properly, I'll need help, someone I can trust, and you're capable enough to manage anything. The mine could support both of us, give you a chance at something better than this." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. "Reed, you don't owe me anything beyond gratitude. You don't have to offer me charity." "It's not charity," he said, stepping closer. "These past days, getting to know you, I've come to realize something. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met, Lily me. You're strong and kind, and you took a chance on a stranger when you had every reason not to. And you're cooking," he smiled, that genuine smile that still made her doubt her own memories. "Your cooking is wonderful. I don't understand why anyone ever told you different." "Maybe," Lily said slowly, the realization dawning even as she spoke. "Maybe it's you. Maybe you're the one who's different. Maybe something about the way you taste things makes my cooking good to you when it's terrible to everyone else." Reed considered this, his head tilting thoughtfully. "Or maybe everyone else in that town is a fool with no appreciation for honest food. Either way, I know what I taste and I know how I feel about you." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm falling for you, Lily. Have been since you helped me into your house and tended my wounds like I mattered." Lily's throat tightened with emotion. No one had looked at her the way Reed was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she was exactly right instead of perpetually wrong. "I don't want you making promises you'll regret when you're healed and thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearly now," Reed said. "Clearer than I have in years. Say you'll consider it, please." Before Lily could answer, the sound of hoofbeats on the road made them both freeze. Reed's hand went instinctively to his hip where his gun would have been, if Lily hadn't locked it away with his other belongings, and they exchanged a tense glance before hurrying back toward the house. Through the front window, they watched as 3 riders approached, hard-looking men with the dust of long travel on their clothes and weapons hanging obvious at their sides. "Sutton's men," Reed confirmed grimly, recognizing them even at a distance. "They've found me." Lily's mind raced through options, landing on the only one that made sense given Reed's still weakened condition. "Get in the back room and stay quiet. Let me handle this. Lily, these men are dangerous." "So am I when I need to be," she said, checking that her father's rifle was loaded and propped within easy reach. "Now go." Reed hesitated, clearly torn between protecting her and knowing he was in no condition to fight, then nodded and disappeared into the back room. Lily took a deep breath, smoothed her skirts, and stepped out onto the porch just as the three men reined in their horses before her house. The leader was a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes like cold slate. "Afternoon, madam." "We're looking for a man might have passed this way few days back, wounded, riding a bay horse." "Lots of men pass by here," Lily said evenly, keeping her hands visible and her voice mild. "Can't say I've seen anyone wounded, though. What's he wanted for?" "That's between us and him," Scarface said. "Mind if we look around?" "Yes, I do mind." Lily kept her tone polite but firm. "This is private property, and I don't take kindly to armed strangers making demands. If you've got official business, come back with the marshal." One of the other men, a younger one with mean eyes, snorted. "We don't need the marshal's permission to search for a thief. Now step aside, lady, before you get hurt." "Can't be a thief if he found that silver himself," Lily said, gambling on her knowledge of the situation. "Which means you're the ones breaking the law by trying to jump his claim, so I'll ask you politely to leave my property before I defend it." Scarface's eyes narrowed. "He's here. You're protecting him." "I'm protecting my home," Lily corrected. "But seeing as you've made your intentions clear, I'll make mine the same." She stepped back into the doorway where her rifle leaned against the frame, not quite pointing it at them but making its presence known. "Leave. Now." The three men exchanged glances, clearly calculating their odds against an armed woman defending her home versus the trouble they'd face if they killed her. Finally, Scarface nodded slowly. "We'll be back, and next time we won't ask so nice." They wheeled their horses around and rode off, and Lily kept the rifle in hand until they disappeared from view. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding and call for Reed. He emerged from the back room looking impressed and concerned in equal measure. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly reckless," he said. "They'll report back to Sutton and he'll send more men or come himself." "Then we need to get you to the territorial office before that happens," Lily said decisively. "Can you ride? I can manage." Reed moved to stand beside her at the window, his shoulder brushing hers. "But I meant what I said before. I want you to come with me, not just to help with the claim, but because I can't imagine going back to a life without you in it." Lily turned to face him, and all the careful walls she'd built around her heart crumbled in the face of his sincerity. "Reed Zimmerman, you've known me less than a week." "I've known you long enough to see who you are," he countered. "And I'm in love with you, Lily me. I love your strength and your kindness, and yes, I love your cooking because it's made with care even if nobody else appreciates it. Come with me. Let me show you that you deserve better than this town's judgment." "I'm scared," Lily admitted, the words barely a whisper. "Scared of believing you and having you realize later that you were wrong about me." Reed cupped her face gently in his hands, mindful of his wounded shoulder. "I'm not wrong, and I'll spend every day proving it to you if you'll let me." When he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, Lily let herself believe. Let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who saw her truly and loved what he saw. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his and made her decision. "We leave at first light," she said. "Together." They spent the evening preparing for the journey, packing supplies and making plans while the Arizona sunset painted the world in shades of fire. Lily cooked one last meal in her kitchen, A simple dinner of beans and cornbread, and when Reed ate it with his usual enthusiasm and asked for more, she finally laughed with something like acceptance. "Maybe you're right," she said, watching him clean his plate. "Maybe it's not as terrible as I thought." "It's delicious," Reed said firmly. "And even if the whole world disagreed, I'd still think so. That's love, Lily. It makes everything sweeter." That night, Lily lay on her cot and listened to Reed breathing in the next room, and she let herself imagine a future she'd never dared hope for. A future with someone who valued her for everything she was, someone who turned her greatest shame into something that didn't matter or maybe never had. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. They rose before dawn and loaded Reed's horse with supplies while the desert was still cool and dark. Lily took a last look at the small ranch, feeling a pang of loss for her father's dream, but also a sense of possibility that outweighed the sadness. She locked the house and hid the key in its usual spot, thinking she might return someday or might not, and either way would be all right. The ride to Tucson, where the territorial office was located, would take 2 full days of hard travel. They set out as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, riding side by side through the magnificent desolation of the Arizona landscape. Reed was still weak but determined, and Lily kept a watchful eye on him and their surroundings, her rifle close at hand. They talked as they rode, making plans and sharing dreams. Reed described his vision for the silver mine, not just wealth, but building something lasting, maybe a whole operation that could provide jobs for honest workers. Lily spoke hesitantly about her own hopes, small things she'd never dared voice before, like having a garden that flourished and keeping chickens that laid more than 3 eggs a week. But Reed listened like she was describing the grandest ambitions, and told her they'd make it all happen. By midday, they'd put good distance between themselves and Globe, stopping to rest the horses and eat some of the food Lily had packed. She'd made sandwiches with bread she'd baked the previous day, and Reed consumed his with the same appreciation he'd shown every meal, making small sounds of pleasure that now made Lily smile instead of doubt. "Tell me about your family," she asked as they sat in the shade of a tall saguaro cactus. "You said you lost your parents young. Was there anyone else?" "A sister," Reed said, his expression growing distant. "Caroline. She was younger than me by 3 years. After our parents died, we went to different relatives. I haven't seen her in over a decade, don't even know if she's still alive." Pain flickered across his face. "I always meant to find her once I got settled, had something to offer. The silver mine that could finally make it possible." "Then we'll find her," Lily said firmly. "Once the claim is registered and secure, we'll search until we do." Reed looked at her with such gratitude and love that Lily felt her heart expand. "How did I get so lucky to fall off my horse near your ranch? Pretty sure you got shot and nearly died," Lily reminded him dryly. "Not what I'd call lucky." "Lucky in the ways that matter," Reed insisted, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. "Finding you makes everything else worth it." They rode on through the afternoon, and as the sun began its descent, they made camp in a small canyon that offered protection and a trickle of water from a spring. Lily tended Reed's shoulder, pleased that the wound continued healing well, and then set about making dinner with their limited supplies. She managed a passable meal of salt pork and beans, and Reed's enjoyment of it had become so familiar that Lily found herself relaxing into the routine of caring for him. After they'd eaten, they sat by the small fire and watched the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. Reed told her stories of his prospecting days, the dangers and the boredom and the desperate hope that kept men searching for strikes that might never come. Lily told him about the early days on the ranch with her father, the good years before her mother left, the feeling that they'd been building something that would last. "It still can," Reed said. "We can build something that lasts, together." "You're very certain about us," Lily observed. "Most men would need more time. Most men haven't had their life saved by a beautiful woman who then fed them the best meals they've ever eaten," Reed countered. "I know what I want, Lily. The question is whether you know what you want." Lily was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire dance. Finally, she said, "I want to believe that I'm not broken, that the thing everyone in Globe thinks makes me worthless doesn't actually matter. When I'm with you, I almost can believe it." "You're not broken," Reed said fiercely. "You're perfect exactly as you are. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." That night, they slept on opposite sides of the fire, but Lily woke once in the darkness to find Reed watching her with an expression of such tenderness that she felt tears prick her eyes. She reached across the space between them and took his hand, and they fell back asleep connected, anchored to each other under the endless stars. The second day of travel brought them into rougher country, hills and canyons that slowed their progress but offered more cover. They were perhaps 3 hours from Tucson when Reed suddenly tensed and pointed to the horizon. Lily followed his gaze and saw the dust plume of multiple riders coming fast from the direction of Globe. "Sutton's men," Reed confirmed grimly. "They must have figured out where we're headed." They pushed their horses harder, racing toward Tucson with desperation lending speed. The territorial office closed at sundown, and they had perhaps an hour of daylight left. Behind them, the riders were gaining, close enough now that Lily could count at least 5 men. Her heart hammered as she calculated distances and odds, knowing they wouldn't make it to town before being overtaken. "There," Reed shouted, pointing to a cluster of rock formations ahead. "We can defend that position." They wheeled their horses into the rocks and dismounted, Reed wincing as the movement jarred his shoulder but drawing his pistol with steady hands. Lily took up position with her rifle, sighting down the barrel at the approaching riders. They'd given up subtlety now, coming straight on with weapons drawn. "Stop here," Lily called out when they were within range. "We've got the high ground and we're both armed. First one who comes closer gets shot." The riders reined in, and Lily recognized Scarface in the lead along with the young mean-eyed man from before. The other 3 were new, harder-looking men who'd clearly been brought as reinforcements. Behind them, riding a fine black horse, came a 6th man dressed in expensive city clothes and wearing the kind of arrogance that only money could buy. Victor Sutton himself, Lily guessed. "Zimmerman," Sutton called out, his voice carrying across the desert. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, all over a claim that doesn't even legally belong to you yet." "It will by tomorrow," Reed shouted back, "and there's nothing you can do to stop it." "Actually, there is," Sutton said pleasantly. "I can kill you here and now, and your lady friend too if she insists on being foolish about it. No witnesses. No one to contradict my story that you were trespassing on one of my claims and got violent when confronted." "Except we're 3 hours from Tucson," Lily called out, keeping her rifle trained on Scarface. "Close enough that someone will hear gunshots, close enough that the marshal will come investigating. You kill us, and you'll have a lot of explaining to do." Sutton's smile faltered slightly. "Then perhaps we can reach an arrangement. Zimmerman, I'll buy your claim right now. $5,000, more money than you'd see in 10 years of working it yourself." "Not interested," Reed said flatly. "That claim is worth 10 times that, and we both know it." "Then you're a fool," Sutton said, his pleasant tone evaporating. "Men, take them." What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and noise. Scarface and two others spurred their horses forward while Mean Eyes and the remaining man tried to flank around the rocks. Lily fired, her shot catching Scarface in the leg and sending him tumbling from his horse with a scream. Reed's pistol cracked twice in quick succession, and one of the flanking men went down clutching his arm. The other riders pulled back, suddenly aware that their targets were better shots than expected and more willing to defend themselves. "Federal Marshal," a new voice boomed across the desert, and Lily's heart leaped as she saw three riders approaching fast from the direction of Tucson, one carrying the distinctive silver star. "All of you drop your weapons now." The marshal and his two deputies reached the scene with weapons drawn, taking in the situation with practiced eyes. Sutton immediately assumed an expression of wronged innocence, but Reed was already talking, his voice carrying authority despite his wounded state. "Marshal, my name is Reed Zimmerman. These men have been trying to kill me to steal my silver claim. They ambushed me 5 days ago, shot me, and have been hunting me since. This man," he pointed to Sutton, "is Victor Sutton, and he's behind it all." "Lies," Sutton said smoothly. "This man has been squatting on my property and threatened violence when asked to leave." "Then you won't mind if we ride into town and sort this out proper," the marshal said, his tone suggesting it wasn't a request. "All of you come peaceful-like. Anyone tries to run, they'll answer to me." The ride into Tucson was tense, with Sutton's men disarmed and sullen and Sutton himself maintaining his facade of innocence. But when they reached the marshal's office, Reed's story was corroborated by the wound in his shoulder and the testimony of a prospector who'd witnessed part of the original ambush. Sutton's men began turning on each other under questioning, and by nightfall, the territorial authority had arrested Sutton and his crew on charges of attempted murder and claim jumping. Reed registered his claim that evening with the Territorial Land Office, making it official and uncontestable. Standing beside him as the clerk recorded the details, Lily felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. They'd survived. They'd won. The marshal offered them rooms at a respectable boarding house for the night, and after the chaos of the day, the simple comfort of a clean bed and 4 walls felt like luxury. Reed's shoulder had started bleeding again from the exertion, so Lily changed his bandages one more time, her hands gentle but efficient. "You saved my life today," Reed said, watching her work. "Your shooting, your quick thinking. I wouldn't be here without you." "We saved each other," Lily corrected. "That's what partners do. Partners," Reed repeated, catching her hand as she finished tying off the bandage. "Is that what we are?" "I think we're more than that," Lily said softly. "Or we could be if you still want me now that the excitement is over." "Lily, me," Reed said, pulling her down to sit beside him on the bed. "The excitement of running from killers is over, yes, but the excitement of building a life with you is just beginning." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of ore that glinted silver in the lamplight. "I found this the day I struck the vein. Kept it because I wanted to remember the moment my life changed. But my life really changed when I woke up and saw you standing over me in the desert." He pressed the ore into her palm. "I'm going to use some of the money from the mine to buy you a proper ring. But for now, I'm asking you with this. Marry me, Lily. Be my partner in everything." Tears blurred Lily's vision as she closed her hand around the ore, feeling its weight and its promise. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." When Reed kissed her, it was different from before, deeper and more certain, a promise sealed between them. They held each other through the night, planning and dreaming and sometimes just sitting in grateful silence that they'd survived to see this moment. The next morning, they found a preacher willing to perform a simple ceremony, and with the marshal and his wife as witnesses. Lily Mee became Mrs. Zimmerman in a ceremony that lasted all of 10 minutes, but felt more real and binding than anything she'd ever experienced. Reed was still healing, still weak from his ordeal, but when he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure. They spent 2 weeks in Tucson while Reed recovered his strength and made arrangements for working the mine. He hired a reputable foreman and a small crew of men he'd worked with before, men he trusted to start the operation properly. The mine would take months or even years to reach its full potential, but the initial assays confirmed what Reed had suspected, that it was a rich strike that would provide well for them. During those weeks, Lily cooked for Reed in the small kitchen of the boarding house, and he continued to eat everything she made with genuine pleasure. She tried increasingly complicated dishes, testing the limits of his appreciation, but every time he cleaned his plate and asked for more. Finally, she made peace with what seemed to be the truth, that whatever strange alchemy existed between her cooking and Reed's palate, it worked in her favor, and she would stop questioning the gift. They traveled back to Globe only once, to collect Lily's belongings and make arrangements for the ranch. She sold it to a young family just starting out, taking less money than it was worth because she remembered what it felt like to hope for something better. The wife was a timid woman who thanked Lily profusely, and Lily found herself offering advice about chickens and water management, feeling a strange kinship with this other woman trying to build a life in harsh country. Before they left Globe for the last time, Lily walked through town and stopped by the general store. The shopkeeper who'd traded with her, the one who'd made her promise not to bring him food, was behind the counter. He looked surprised to see her. "Heard you got married," he said awkwardly. "To that prospector fellow." "I did," Lily confirmed, "and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" He looked confused. "For what?" "For being honest about my cooking, even when it hurt to hear. It made me stronger." She smiled, a real smile with no bitterness. "And it turns out, some people like it just fine." She left before he could respond, walking back to where Reed waited with the horses. They rode out of Globe together, headed for the camp near the mine that would be their home while they built something permanent. The journey took 3 days through some of the most beautiful and brutal landscape Arizona had to offer. And every night Reed ate whatever simple meal Lily prepared with the same enthusiasm and appreciation. The mining camp was rough, a collection of tents and temporary structures where the crew worked in shifts to excavate the silver. Reed had arranged for a larger tent set apart from the others for their living space, and Lily immediately set about making it a home. She established a kitchen area, organized their supplies, and even started a small garden using precious water from the mine's spring. The first month was hard, adjusting to the noise and activity of the mining operation, learning to manage the needs of the crew, dealing with the isolation of being the only woman in camp. But Reed was beside her through all of it, and his presence made everything bearable. He consulted her on decisions about the mine, valued her opinion on hiring and operations, made it clear to every man in camp that she was his partner in every sense of the word. Lily took over cooking for the crew, approaching it with trepidation given her history, but to her amazement, the miners ate her food without complaint. Some even complimented her biscuits, the same biscuits that had once been used as slingshot ammunition. She began to wonder if perhaps she'd never been as terrible a cook as Globe had convinced her she was, or if being surrounded by hard-working men who were genuinely hungry made them less critical, or if she'd somehow improved through sheer practice. Whatever the reason, the constant criticism and judgment that had haunted her in Globe was absent here, and she flourished in its absence. 3 months into their marriage, Reed surprised her by bringing someone to camp, a woman in her early 20s with Reed's blue eyes and a hesitant smile. Caroline, his long-lost sister, found through a private detective Reed had quietly hired. The reunion was tearful and joyous, and Caroline stayed at the camp for 2 weeks, getting to know her brother again and forming a quick friendship with Lily. "He loves you so much," Caroline told Lily one evening while they prepared dinner together. "It's all he talks about, you and the mine and the future you're building." "I love him too," Lily said simply. "He saved me in ways that have nothing to do with the claim jumpers." "He told me about your cooking," Caroline said with a gentle smile. "How everyone said it was terrible, but he thinks it's wonderful." Lily laughed. "I've stopped trying to understand it. Maybe love really does change how things taste." "Or maybe," Caroline suggested, "you were always fine and the people around you were just unkind. Either way, I think Reed is right. This stew is delicious." By the time the mine had been in operation for 6 months, it was clear that Reed's strike was everything he'd hoped and more. The silver flowed steadily, providing income that allowed them to start building a real house near the camp, a sturdy structure with multiple rooms and a proper kitchen that made Lily's heart sing. They hired a crew of carpenters and masons, and over the next 4 months, watched their home take shape against the Arizona sky. They moved into the house on a warm spring day in 1885, nearly a year after Reed had been shot and stumbled into Lily's life. Standing in her new kitchen with its cast iron stove and spacious counters, Lily felt a swell of emotion so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Reed found her there and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "So happy it scares me," Lily admitted. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing's going to go wrong," Reed promised. "We've built this together and we'll keep building it together. You, me, and whatever comes next." What came next, as it turned out, was a baby. Lily discovered she was pregnant in the summer of 1885, and Reed's joy was so profound and genuine that it swept away her fears about motherhood and whether she'd be adequate to the task. They prepared the nursery together, painting it soft yellow and building a cradle from mesquite wood. The miners presented them with gifts whittled and crafted during their off hours, little toys and blankets that spoke of their affection for the couple who treated them fairly and built something good in the harsh desert. Their son was born in March of 1886, on a night when the spring storms rolled across the mountains with thunder that shook the house. They named him Thomas, after Lily's father, and he came into the world with a lusty cry that suggested he'd be strong like both his parents. Reed cried when he held his son for the first time, and Lily fell in love with both of them all over again, watching her husband cradle their child with such tender care. The mine continued to prosper, and Reed expanded the operation carefully, always mindful of treating his workers fairly and managing the resource sustainably. He built a small town around the mine, with a proper store and a school and even a church, creating the kind of community that would last beyond the silver. Lily became the unofficial mayor of this growing settlement, organizing social events and settling disputes, and ensuring that families who came to work the mine had what they needed to thrive. She never did become a truly great cook by anyone's standard except Reed's, but she became good enough that people ate her meals without complaint, and the old shame that had defined her in Globe faded to a distant memory. She taught herself other skills instead, became the settlement's unofficial nurse, and the person people came to for advice. She raised her son with the same practical strength her father had shown her, teaching him to ride and shoot and respect the land, but also to raid and think and treat others with kindness. When Thomas was 2 years old, Lily gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, and their house filled with the chaos and joy of children. Reed was a devoted father, teaching his son the mining business while spoiling his daughters with toys and attention. The mine provided enough that they could have left Arizona, could have moved to San Francisco or Denver or anywhere else, but they stayed because they'd built something real here, something that mattered. Caroline married one of the mine foremen, a good man named Daniel, and they built a house near Reed and Lily's. The two families grew up intertwined, their children playing together while the adults worked side by side to build their community. On Sundays, they gathered for dinner at the big house, and Lily cooked meals that Reed always praised and everyone else ate politely, and it became a family joke that somehow made the old wound hurt less. Years passed in a blur of work and family and building. The mine produced for over a decade, making Reed one of the wealthiest men in the territory, but he never became like Victor Sutton. He remembered what it felt like to be desperate and shot and dying in the desert, remembered the woman who'd saved him and fed him and loved him when he had nothing but acclaim and hope. He used his wealth to help others, funding schools and hospitals, helping young prospectors get their start, always giving back to the land and people that had given him so much. Thomas grew into a serious young man who took to the mining business with natural aptitude, while Sarah became a teacher, and Emma showed early talent for music. The children brought home stories and friends and eventually romances, and the house that had once seemed too large filled with life and noise and love. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Reed took Lily back to the spot where she'd found him, the cluster of mesquite trees that had saved his life by providing just enough shade. They stood together in the desert evening, older now but no less devoted to each other, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of copper and gold. "I've been thinking about that day," Reed said, his arm around Lily's waist. "How close I came to dying, how easily you could have kept walking." "I couldn't have," Lily said. "Even then, something told me you were important. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved," Reed continued. "Not just from the bullet, but from loneliness, from the kind of life where money matters more than people. You showed me what was worth building." "We built it together," Lily reminded him, leaning into his solid warmth. "Everything good we have, we made it together." "Tell me," Reed said, a smile in his voice. "Do you still think your cooking is terrible?" Lily laughed, the sound carrying across the desert. "I think my cooking is what it is, but I know that you love it and you love me, and that's all that matters." "I do love it," Reed confirmed. "Every single meal you've ever made me, and I'll love every meal for the rest of our lives." They stayed there as the stars emerged, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, and built a life that surpassed anything either had dreamed possible. The mine would eventually play out, as all mines did, but by then they'd have diversified into other ventures, would have established their family and community on foundations that went deeper than silver. Their children would grow and have children of their own, carrying forward the values of hard work and kindness, and taking chances on people when it mattered. But all of that was future. In this moment, they were simply Reed and Lily, cowboy and rancher, husband and wife, standing in the desert where their story had begun with a bullet and bad cooking and love that had transformed everything. He'd eaten every bite she'd ever served him and asked for seconds, and in doing so, he'd given her back the part of herself she'd thought was irredeemably broken. 20 years from that day in the desert, 30 years, 40, they would still be together, still building their life bite by bite and day by day. Thomas would take over the family businesses. Sarah would open a school for the settlement's children. Emma would travel to San Francisco to study music, and then return home to teach it to others. There would be grandchildren, more than a dozen of them eventually, and great-grandchildren after that, each one carrying forward the legacy of the woman who'd thought she couldn't cook and the man who'd loved her anyway. Reed and Lily grew old together in the house they'd built, watching their community flourish and their family expand, and every single day Reed ate whatever Lily prepared and told her it was delicious. Whether it truly was, or whether love had permanently altered his palate, remained a mystery neither of them cared to solve. What mattered was that they'd found each other, had built something lasting, had proven that the things that make us feel broken might be the very things that lead us to exactly where we're meant to be. On the evening of their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the house that had started as a dream, Lily served a simple meal of stew and cornbread, the same foods she'd made for Reed that first night in her old ranch house, when she'd been convinced he was humoring her. Reed, now in his 70s with silver in his hair and lines around his eyes from decades of Arizona sun, ate with the same enthusiasm he'd shown 50 years before. Still the best cooking in Arizona, he declared, raising his glass to his wife. Every single bite. Their children and grandchildren laughed in on the old family joke, but Lily saw the truth in Reed's eyes. He meant it. He'd always meant it. And whether her cooking was objectively good or whether it only tasted good to him, because it came from her hands with love baked into every bite, she'd finally made peace with the mystery. To 50 more years of your cooking, Reed toasted. And though they both knew that was impossible, that they'd already been given more time than most people got, the sentiment made everyone cheer and raise their glasses. That night, after the party had ended and the family had dispersed to their various homes, Reed and Lily sat on their porch and watched the stars wheel overhead in the vast Arizona sky. They held hands like they had since the beginning, fingers intertwined with the ease of 50 years of practice. "Do you have any regrets?" Lily asked softly. "Things you wish you'd done differently?" Reed was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he said, "I regret that I didn't find you sooner. But everything else, every single choice that led me to that desert where you found me, I'd do it all again exactly the same, because it brought me to you." "I used to think my cooking was my greatest shame," Lily confessed. "The thing that proved I wasn't good enough. But you showed me it didn't matter, that I was enough exactly as I was." "You were always enough," Reed said firmly. "More than enough, you were everything." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd long ago learned that the best conversations happened in the spaces between words. Inside the house, their grandchildren slept in various bedrooms, visiting for the anniversary celebration. The mine had closed years ago, the silver finally exhausted, but the town remained, sustained now by ranching and trade and the school that Sarah had built into something respected throughout the territory. Arizona had become a state. The wild frontier they'd known had been tamed, but the land itself remained magnificent and harsh and beautiful. Their story had become local legend. The woman who couldn't cook and the cowboy who'd loved her food anyway, the couple who'd built an empire on silver and devotion. People told it with smiles and knowing looks, understanding that it was really a story about love transforming everything it touched. As the night deepened and the desert cooled, Reed and Lily finally went inside to the bed they'd shared for half a century. They'd sleep tangled together like always, and in the morning, Lily would make breakfast and Reed would eat it with appreciation. And they'd face another day in the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and hope, and a chance meeting on a desperate day in the desert. Their love story wasn't about perfect cooking or dramatic rescues, or even about silver strikes and claim jumpers, though it contained all those elements. It was about two broken people who'd found in each other the missing pieces that made them whole. It was about a woman who'd been told she was worthless, learning that she was invaluable. It was about a man who'd been alone, discovering that partnership multiplied every joy and divided every sorrow. It was about how sometimes the things we're most ashamed of become the things that lead us exactly where we need to be, and how love has the power to transform poison into nourishment, shame into pride, loneliness into belonging. And it was about how a simple act of eating every bite and asking for seconds could change two lives forever, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the deepest meaning. Reed and Lily Zimmerman lived out their days in the Arizona desert they'd claimed as home, surrounded by family and community, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from building something good. When they finally passed, years later and within months of each other because neither could bear to be without the other for long, they left behind a legacy that had nothing to do with silver and everything to do with love, perseverance, and the courage to take chances on wounded strangers who might just be your destiny in disguise. Their grandchildren would tell their story for generations, embellishing and refining it until it became the kind of tale people told around fires and dinner tables, a reminder that love finds us in the strangest places, and that sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you thought you were helping. The house they'd built stood for over a century, a testament to what two people could create when they believed in each other against all evidence and odds. And somewhere in the family archives, carefully preserved, was a small piece of silver ore that Reed had given Lily as a promise, and beside it, the recipe cards Lily had used for 50 years of cooking meals that one man had loved with his whole heart. Together, they told a story more precious than any mineral strike, a story of transformation and devotion and the kind of love that endures long after the people who created it have returned to the desert dust from which they came.